And that is something that shocked people quite a lot, because most of people are used to the idea that the kingdom of God is a place where there is no suffering. And according to the insight of interbeing, if there is no suffering, there is no happiness either. Because both are. So interbeing is the ground of ethics or meta-ethics. And then they use a easy example to show that when you look at one person, if you have the time to look, and if you have some mindfulness and concentration, you can see the suffering in him or in her. And if you continue to look, you see that person continues to suffer because he is not capable, he does not know how to handle the suffering. He does not know how to suffer and to handle the suffering in him. That is why he continues to be the victim of his own suffering. So far, no one has helped him to handle the suffering in him and transform it. That is why he continues to suffer. And as he suffers, he makes the people around him suffer, including you. Maybe he does not want to make you suffer, but because he does not know how to handle the suffering in him, that is why his suffering is spilling all over, and you become the second victim of his suffering. And when you see that and you understand that, suddenly you are no longer angry at him. You don't want to punish him anymore. Instead, you want to say something or to do something to help him suffer less. It means that you have compassion in your heart, born from understanding suffering. So compassion is something that is born from suffering, from understanding suffering. And it is easy enough to understand. Compassion is born from understanding. And understanding of what? Understanding of suffering. When you know how to look into suffering, when you have the time, if you are so busy, you cannot do that. Especially when you are so busy making money, you do not have the time in order to look at the suffering and listen to the suffering and embrace the suffering. And the energy that can help you to look at the suffering, listen to suffering, and embrace suffering is called mindfulness. Mindfulness of suffering, mindfulness of listening to suffering, mindfulness of embracing suffering. So, listening to suffering, embracing suffering, bring about understanding of suffering. And when understanding of suffering is there, compassion is born. That is the mechanism of compassion. And the whole audience understood, because it's easy enough. And that is why between compassion and suffering there is a connection. And that is why in a place where there is no suffering, there is no compassion either. And as we know that the kingdom of God has love and compassion, we know also that suffering is there. Like in a place where there are lotus flowers, you know that the mud is there also. Because it's so clear that without the mud, no lotus is possible. That is the key point. So I spent a few minutes talking about the interbeing between suffering and love and compassion. And they said that if you know how to suffer, you suffer much less. And you know how to make good use of suffering in order to create understanding and compassion. And these are two elements are the foundation of true happiness. Because a person who does not have understanding and compassion, that person cannot be happy at all. So happiness is born from suffering. But you don't have to go and look for suffering because there is enough of suffering here and now. So you can make good use of suffering. And that is why you have to learn the Dharma. The Dharma tells us how to suffer, how to understand suffering, and how to generate compassion in order to be a happy person. Because a person without compassion cannot be a happy person. A person without understanding and compassion is utterly alone, and she cannot relate to any other human being. And corporate leaders who are very rich, very wealthy, can be very lonely. Even if they have a lot of money, but if they do not have enough compassion, they don't have compassion, and then they are utterly lonely. Money cannot make their happiness. So happiness is made of compassion, of love and understanding. So they took the time to explain like that. And that is the first thing that is shocking for the audience. The second thing that is shocking is that they said that compassion should be directed to yourself first. But if you don't know how to be compassionate to yourself, it's very difficult to be compassionate to another person. And that is why you have to listen to your own suffering first. Your suffering carries within itself the suffering of your father, of your mother, of your ancestors. And if you understand your own suffering, you understand the suffering of your father. And you are not angry at your father anymore. So understanding the suffering of oneself is very important. To have the time to be with your suffering. To have the time to listen to your own suffering. To have the time to embrace your suffering tenderly is what we should do in the beginning. But people in our society, they don't like to do that. They don't think that it is a pleasant thing to do. They don't want to go home to themselves and get in touch with the suffering inside because they are afraid that they will be overwhelmed by the suffering inside. That is why most people try to run away from themselves. They use internet, music, electronic games, conversations, magazines, books, food, in order to forget for a while the suffering in them. And that is one of the characteristics of our civilization, running away from oneself. But according to the teaching of the Buddha, if you know how to practice mindfulness of breathing, mindfulness of sitting, mindfulness of walking, mindfulness of your action, your speech, and your thinking, and then you are equipped with that kind of energy, and then you can go home to yourself without fear, in order to listen to your own suffering, to embrace your suffering, and finally to understand it. When you understand suffering, compassion is born in you, and you suffer less. Now you can help the other person, your partner, your father, your son, your daughter. If you have understood your own suffering, it's much easier to understand the suffering of the other person. And when you understand his or her suffering, you are no longer angry at him or her. Compassion is born in you. And you want to do something to help the other person suffer less. That is compassion in action. And you can do that for other people also, after you have been able to do it for him, for her, the nearest person to you. And that is the second thing that shocked the audience. Compassion has to be directed to yourself. Because most of people in the audience think that compassion is for another person. And the third thing, I told the audience that as a community, you can generate a collective energy of compassion that can be very healing. As one individual, of course, you can generate compassion. But if you are 300 people, 700 people, 1,000 people sitting together, breathing together, generating the energy of understanding of suffering and compassion, understanding and compassion, and then the collective energy of compassion can be very healing for everyone who happen to be there in that zone of energy. So Thầy showed them that compassion is not an individual kind of energy, but it can be collective. And when the energy of compassion is collective, it is much more powerful, and it can help people to heal. So I propose very concrete things like in a hospital. If all the doctors and nurses and employees know how to practice mindful breathing and getting in touch with the suffering inside of them and around them, that will create a very powerful energy of compassion that can help patients who come to the hospital to heal much more quickly. This seems to be something very new for them. And Thầy also propose that the people in that organization, teachers, students, and researchers, employees, all practice mindful breathing, mindfulness of compassion, of suffering, in order to generate compassion together. And you should teach by yourself, by your way of life, and not just by giving a talk in a classroom. Doing research and talking about suffering to the students, you have to embody compassion And that people will believe in the power of compassion. We have answered quite a number of questions, but there are many questions that are left unanswered. This is one of the question that is written. Research has also shown that compassion has extraordinary health benefits. Not only does it reduce inflammation at the cellular level, but it also appears to be associated with a longer, healthier, and happier life. That is what the researchers found out. That if you have compassion, you live a longer life. And compassion can heal you, can heal things like inflammation in your cells. From your perspective as a teacher, have you noticed this impact on compassion, on health and biology? And why do you think that happened? And we can say like this: when compassion is there in your heart, you are no longer angry. Because compassion is an antidote for anger. And without anger, you are more relaxed. You are more pleasant. You are more peaceful. And that will facilitate the healing. And when you do not have anger, you can communicate with yourself much more easily. You can understand yourself much more easily. And you can communicate with the other person more easily. And you can restore communication. And you can reconcile with him or her. Anger blocks communication. And that's why when you are able to generate compassion, it transforms anger, and then you restore communication. And if communication is restored, everything is possible again. And compassion is the kind of energy that motivates you to do something to help people who suffer. That gives you an ideal, that gives you a meaning to your life. And that is why you live long and so on. And compassion not only helps heal you, but that is a kind of energy that can protect you better than guns, bombs, and so on. If you have compassion in yourself, in your heart, and then that energy of compassion will protect you from many kinds of dangers. Even violent people, terrorists, and so on. When you are compassionate and you don't react in fear, in anger, and that is why you draw much less danger to yourself. If you are angry, you make the people fearful of you. And if they are fearful, they will attack you, being afraid that you will kill them or attack them first. That is why compassion protects you and also protects the other person. And in the Buddhist teaching, the Buddha taught that if you can produce compassion and prevent a kind of fight to happen, you win. You win for both people. You win for him and for you at the same time. That is a real victory. The governor Badya, before he became a monk, under the guidance of the Buddha, he was very afraid because he did not sleep well. Because people are ready to go into his palace in order to steal his wealth and kill him. So even he was protected by many soldiers. He was always very afraid during the night. He's afraid that someone go into the castle and kill him and get all his valuables.